such a great panel here today to discuss this. There is no dearth of books being produced for children, but what about their quality? Are they the right books which could fire a child's imagination or perk up her curiosity? This session will examine the quality of books available for children and look into how books are being made accessible to children. It will discuss the role of the retail trade and the effectiveness of state-sponsored library system in providing access of good books. Innovations in this area, especially new formats like ebooks, apps, and transmedia content, will also be discussed. This session is being chaired by Arvinda Anantharaman. Arvinda has been working closely with children's literature for the last 10 years as a librarian and author. She has worked with Hippocampus Children's Library, where she was involved in the book selection and advisory and in creating reading programs. Arvinda also set up Lama Mani Books, a publishing imprint for a Tibetan NGO under which they published 2 books. She has published with Penguin Books India, authoring Puffin Life series on the 14th Dalai Lama and co-authoring Playing to Win by Saina Nehwal. Another Puffin Lives title on astronaut Sunita Williams is scheduled for a 2014 publication. I invite Arvinda here with the other panel members, Mr. Arvind Kumar, Gayatri T.N., Rimli Bhattacharya, Ruben de Cruz, and Shantanu Tamuli.
Welcome to this panel on children's publishing. The theme for today's session is Are There Enough Good Books for Children? And I couldn't have had a better set of panelists here. Just to briefly introduce everybody, I have Gayatri from Bangalore. She runs a bookstore and a toy store and a space for parents and children called Kutuhala. Does a lot of sessions with parents and authors and storytellers and so on. Professor Rimli Bhattacharya, I'll drop the professor, from Delhi University, extensive experience with literature in general and children's literature in particular. Currently based in Calcutta, doing a lot of work with books. We have Arvind Kumar, who's probably seen children's literature grow in the country with NBT, with Scholastic, now and with the India Book Trust that he runs, along with Arundhati. We have Ruben de Cruz from NBT. Again, has probably seen a lot of growth in children's literature because of the work he's done with NBT and in Kerala as well. We have Mr. Shantanu Tamuli from Assam, quietly, doing a lot of great work with children's literature in Assamese itself, especially promoting science among children. And I'm Arvinda, moderating this session, and I've been working with children's literature for the last 10 years, reading children's books a lot longer. I continue to read them. I have my first question for Rimli. Coming from a non-publishing perspective, where do you think our books stand today as far as quality of the books we produce in India goes?
I think the first thing is to think about what kind of children and from where, because there's such a huge number of children who have absolutely no access to any books. And there are, I think, still, thanks to some of the pioneering efforts that NBT and others have already done, that a lot of books which are of very high quality can be made available to a huge number of children. But because it's a very uneven field. I was recently asked to speak on children's literature in Korea, and the first thing I said is that you just have to smash that thing itself called children's literature and look at it in a number of ways. Whole huge numbers of children who never see a book excepting perhaps the textbook that they hold, and even that they may not have. So it's actually almost impossible in some ways to come up with a one-line answer to your question. I would say that there's a lot of good stuff that may not be very contemporary, but which I would call a good book. And there's a lot of new, interesting experiments being made with form, content, color, design, etc. But not all of it is equally good. But I would end it with one other point, which is that finally, I think at the end of the day, for a child to even engage with a book is more important than the good book. So while this kutuhal and this desire to find good books has to be on. If we just reduce it to that, then there's a problem. So, I mean, I'd like to open up the question of the good book itself.
So you're saying access to books will impact the quality at some point. So we start.
No. I don't mean that it should be a laissez-faire thing. But what I mean is that you can have a fantastic text, but in the way it circulates, in the context in which it's being read, a lot will depend on what's happening in terms of the space in which that the child engages with the text. So I've seen this, for example, with some beautiful poems by Tagore, completely decimated in a matter of seconds in a small school in West Bengal, not because it was a small school, but because of the whole structure that the school had imbibed. And I've seen the opposite. In fact, it was a book by Pulak Biswas in a remote district in Bankura, where there were, I think, very little words, mostly pictures, which worked wonderfully, simply because the child who was engaging with it had other people, including myself, who were not pushing the book in a particular direction. So that.
Gayatri, what is your experience? You handpick books that you sell at your store. You get to engage with parents and children who come to buy or spend time at your store. How do you choose? What do what is your take on what we are bringing out today? And also, what is the perception of your customers towards the books we are producing? Do you find that there is a difference in how they view books from the West and how they view books that we are publishing?
Okay, I think there are a lot of questions there. You'll probably have to remind me of the questions if I don't answer something. But I would like to differ a bit from what Rimli just said, that it's important to give access to a book rather than a good book, because I think that used to be true probably in our generation, but not anymore. Because I would like to think of our industry competing with TV and videos, and which are highly addictive mediums. And if we want to get the child to actually engage with books, we have to actually produce really high quality books which will actually bring the attention back to books. So that is, I think, something that I truly believe in. And in terms of parents, in my experience, we only work with upper middle class and maybe middle class parents. And whatever I say, I think relates to that audience. And what we have found is that I don't think parents necessarily realize the importance of reading aloud to children from a very young age. I think it's extremely important for the parents to do that if the child has to fall in love with reading. Not only don't they realize that the problem is also that they don't find the need for a child to fall in love with reading. As long as a child knows how to read, it's enough for them, because that's what you need to pass exams in their mind, and the focus is always on exams and reading the textbook. And in the process, there's a lot of pressure on the child, and the child doesn't really get to experience the joy of reading for pleasure. And we are losing out. I mean, even for the publishing industry to succeed, if we want to look at the future, we need to be creating readers who are enjoying reading, and that is not happening. So that is something.
But how do parents view our books? So what is, when they come and look? You have both Indian books and non-Indian books. How do they perceive? What is the perception to our books?
Okay. So having said what I said, for the parents who realize the importance of reading aloud to children and who come to our store, what I found is they do view Indian books in a quite a positive way. They are very excited that all these new titles are coming out by these new publishers, and although not everything is of high quality, but the ones that they really are able to engage their child with, they're extremely excited about it. So,
and how do the children see it? I mean, they don't have the kind of baggage that adults do. So how do they see? Do they distinguish between how they perceive non-Indian books and how they perceive books published here, produced here?
yeah, I think the advantage we have with Indian books is we are able to sort of get the author and have the children interact with the authors. So that, I think, creates a sort of excitement in the child, and they do enjoy reading the book. Having said that, I think it also depends on the parent. If they are totally into Western books, I know that like the good Western picture books, if they enjoy reading that, children are not necessarily attracted to Indian books. But if they are only exposed to Indian books, they do enjoy it. So it depends a lot on the parent, what they get excited about also. So.
Right. Ruben, my next question is for you again. Talking about perceptions itself, you've taken our books outside. You took them to Bologna. You took the World Book Fair. The children's books was the theme. How do people perceive what we are bringing out? What is the reaction to our the books we publish?
See, it is a difficult question to say what is Indian books. I don't know whether there is an Indian books or an Indian children, it cannot be generalized, I believe. Different kinds of Indian children, various kinds of Indian books. For foreign exhibitions, we take only English books. So that can't be an indicator of quality of our books. See, our country have 45% of our population is below 18. That is around 50 crore. I mean, if we call them children, it is more than 50 crore people. 35% of them are not going to school. They don't have any access to school even today. And those who goes to school, also we know what kind of schools they go. They don't have access to any book. Huge number of, 35 crore children have no access to any book. So I look at the issue of quality of Indian children's book is as appropriate and affordable books for these children, and not those things which will compete with the Western quality.
So it's more important to address the larger market of children within our country and make sure that books are available for them and accessible to them, rather than try and compete with books that are coming from the West that maybe the urban reader would probably prefer.
Yeah, even for rural readers or for those who do not have access to books, they also need good quality books at affordable price. Good quality doesn't mean that expensive books. So I think that is the challenge we have in India now.
It's exactly what Ruben has just said. That in fact I've been waging on my own a little battle against, because I also work in primary education, against what I call lowest common denominator, simply because you're dealing with vast numbers. So my point was really to say that the idea of a good book cannot be seen in isolation. And therefore one has to aim for the highest in everything, but not necessarily against a template which has come from some other place. That was the point. Not to sort of clarify.
When Arvind Kumarji was director of NBT, we had an exhibition in Rajasthan. I don't know whether he remember those incidents. So we have a book on Visit to City Market by Manjula Padmanabhan, which is a very good, one of the best books NBT have. I think in Rajasthan villages, it is any urban or English educated child will enjoy that book. A child in a village also enjoys the book, but they use that book as a tool to teach counting and to talk about food. It doesn't have text.
The word.
So it is two situations. So and I'm talking about one book working in two ways in two situations. So there should be different books for different situations.
Right, but it also depends on who is engaging with the books and who's providing, using the book to help the child get the context or add layers to an existing book, right?
Yeah.
Mr. Tamuli, for you, how you've spent the last 20 years or so working with children's literature, and what has this change you've seen within Assam itself? If when Rimli is talking about addressing the lowest denominator, is that something you've been able to address because you work with a smaller, not the entire country, but within the state, so more homogeneous population comparatively, in a language that is more mature than English, in a sense, more evolved, probably more mature writing available. How do you think that has helped you provide books for children?
Question. Definitely, we are all facing some time. Let us go back to our childhood. During our days, what happened? We are not allowed to select books, or books were not available freely. Parents, our elders, teachers, they give us books. So that condition is now changing. Now children has accessibility to select their own books. Totally changed, I think. In one workshop, I remember I asked the participant, they were invited to write for children. There were many books on the table lie down. I arranged according to the age group and content wise, you can say hundreds books. And I asked the participant to select books of their choice. I have given only 2 minutes time. They will be writing stories to children. So what happened? All the participants picked up books. Okay, only 2 minutes time was given to them. Then one by one, I asked them, why you select this book for children? Why you select this book? The first condition, it was the look, how it looks, whether it is appealing to the children, and then go to the content. So within 2 minutes, if we are sincere enough, then we can select a book for the children. But if we consider many factors, it is difficult to select a book for children. In 2012, there is a consultation committee meeting from NBT to make a draft report on good book. So it is very difficult at the time how to define a good book. There were some avoidables. It is better to use avoidables to select the good book. What should not be there in the book. So these sort of things in our case also we apply to select good books out of many books. First thing, in our Assamese language, some of the books are allowed. Those books were mostly Panchatantra. Okay. Jataka stories. Okay. It is good for children. Then mythologies. Okay. So these are things for early grade children. Now the scenario is changed. Children can select their own books. Even Some of the children, they don't go by alphabets. They go by picture. They can select, or they can go through the pages and can read the books. That's also happening today. So we prefer to give books according to their knowledge, background, from which community, from which region they are. Suppose for a children of urban areas, urban school, a children from rural areas, the choice of book is different.
Okay, but this is in the selection of books.
Yes, selection of.
Arvind, you set up a page, right? The Publishers Action Group. Can you tell us a little bit about it and what you've done with the with the group you had last year?
Before that, I think just a couple of comments. When we're talking of quality books, a lavishly book is not necessarily a quality book. A very simple, nice production can also be a good book and fantastic book for children. Ruben talked of reasonably priced books. I hope he was not referring to subsidized books, in which somebody else, the government, or we as taxpayers are paying for the production. We have to look at the situation of a publisher publishing on Ono. And I think the quality depends a lot on how the society engages with the language and children's reading. English books is a category apart because English medium schools, because of their own or maybe external efforts, including what we did in Scholastic way back in 97 onwards, pay a lot of attention to reading promotion. There are exhibitions held, and there are book clubs and book fairs and everything going, and books reach them. Of course, the way books are selected, there is a different question. I won't go deeper into this. But I've seen that parent, those who can afford, there are 3 piles in a book fair. What the mother wants the child to read, what the father wants the child to read, and what the child wants to read. So I won't say which pile has what. When it comes to Indian languages, there are languages we know of. He comes from one language area. There was a whole tradition of reading by children. There was a tradition of presenting books on different occasions. Still, it continues in Maharashtra, Bengal. I believe, after what he has been talking, maybe in Assam. Wherever there is a tradition of buying books for children in own language, or presenting books on different occasions, publishers need to satisfy that readership, need to satisfy the parents, and publishers try. If there were 1,000 people in Hindi willing to buy a copy each of a nice book coming out in Hindi, I'll be encouraged to bring out many, many more books every year. But that, unfortunately, is not the situation in Hindi and many other languages. Telugu, Kannada, what we heard this morning, Odia. Parents are willing to invest on a book in English, but not in Hindi, not in these languages. So what happens? It has given rise to a large number of publishers producing books for children for the government market. For government schools where underprivileged children go, and money is released under Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan once in 3 years to buy books. That's the only opportunity when quality books can reach children through their schools, because those families, and I spend more than 6 or 7 months of the year with such families in a village in Uttarakhand. And these families, children are welcome because we run a library. The larger part of our house, a separate building, is the library for children for the village. And we know that they can't afford a book. There's no question of buying. So they look forward to the school library. And if school library provides material which is so substandard, which puts off children from reading, leave alone attract them to reading, they're scared of books. They're worse than their textbooks. And that's why a group of publishers, I come to your question, got together about 3 years back to form Publishers Action Group, ensuring quality books for children. And this workshop which Mr. Tamoli spoke about was at our initiative. We wanted to invite about 30, 40 people for a consultation. And I went to NBT and asked Mr. Sikandar, I said, how can you help us? He said, you organize, we'll under our umbrella. So they were very decent. They followed exactly what we wanted. And they invited the kind of people we wanted. And we had 3-day consultation in, again, near the village in Uttarakhand. And we came out with a document. NBT has changed the name a little bit, Guide to Good Books. We had named it something else, and Radhika designed it very nicely. It's a lovely book. It's something we like to hold. So that was one thing we did, because wherever we went, talking to officers, to others, talking about good books, and they said, what is a good book? An argument which is given by commercial publisher is that my book is also good. Everybody calls own publication as good. So they said, why don't you define a good book? So the document has come. Another place CBSE, we objected to some books they had recommended 3 years back. They said, well, why doesn't Page put together a selection? And we did. And CBSE got very good feedback from some of the schools. So they requested us to do it again last year. We did. And now 3rd year, we have put together a selection. And this time, at CBSE's suggestion, we have gone beyond English and Hindi. We brought in even languages. So Publishers Action Group is basically asking for transparency in book selection. Publishers Action Group has been active. We were supposed to act. We have asked questions under RTI. We have followed up on the questions. We have proved that the book selected by Navodaya Vidyalaya Samiti for the schools, the selection was corrupt. We had proved that the books recommended by Kendriya Vidyalaya Samiti was, it had books like Nariyan Pralobhan Se Bache for children. Why Nariyan Pralobhan Se Bache? Purush kyun na Pralobhan Se Bache? And this is happening because the publication of books in languages like Hindi is in the hand of publishers who have no love for children, no respect for children. It's just a commodity, is somehow to fill the libraries and take the money. I asked a publisher who had grabbed a huge order in Rajasthan, and since I'm an old player in this game and they tell me things in private, I said, Moolchand, what did you sell? 4-5 crore ka order liya tha. His answer was Kuda Karkat. He's the publisher. And Arundhati was with me. She was shocked. She couldn't believe that the publisher who supplied books worth 5 crores, he said, Maine Kuda Karkat kiya tha. But then again, these publishers also had the norms. A publisher's manager told me recently, but we don't go beyond a certain point. He said they had monopoly on the supply of books to Delhi administration schools. There were about 3,000 of them. He said, but when the principals started asking for more than 50% for themselves, besides the 20% discount on bill, then they decided, no, we won't supply to the libraries. That means they were supplying till 50% bribe to the principals. And what has happened to our educators? A principal sitting on the chair of the principal, heading the school, on a purchase of 3,000 rupees, is wanting 1,000, 1,500 rupees. Yeah. He can be bought for 1,500 rupees. So when that is the situation, and that also applies to purchase of children's books at all levels, not bulk, not crores. Recently, they were going to spend about 20 crores in Bihar, and it was all manipulated. We protested, and I wrote a very nasty letter. I won't give the credit only to my letter. but the director developed cold feet and he scrapped the whole thing. Good that he scrapped the whole thing. Maybe we need a situation like in Assam, no purchase, major purchase taking place for 3 years, so that publishers find better ways. So this is what Page is about.
So it stands like like a watchman.
But it is also very frustrating. We don't always succeed. Some states have perfected their systems. They're corrupt, but they cover their tracks. You can't catch Chhattisgarh. There's a man there, whichever department, whichever division of the education department buys, that man is the nodal person to arrange for the selection and everything else. And he has a direct connection with the minister, and he collects money. But he's clever. The 3, 4, 5 people where he thinks will make a lot of noise, he throws crumbs.
Who would have thought children's publishing could be so exciting?
So exciting. I mean,
what you
and
portray.
his Shastriji, you know. I always name names. I've always named names. So.
Yeah.
Arundhati said she's Arundhati Devstale, a Brahman, and she's shocked at a Brahman doing this.
Yeah.
But it is so tragic. It makes you cry. We fight it out.
Yeah, I was part of a team that spent 6 months in Bangalore trying to select books for the government schools, for the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, to buy books for the government schools. We spent 6 months working with several languages. At the end of it, all publishers could send in books. They're all lying somewhere, rat-eaten very likely. And eventually, it just went back to what it used to be. It is quite frustrating. But where there are no answers for that, I think I'd just like to shift the discussion a little bit to where we probably can offer some answers. Is that I was reading an article about Latin American children's literature, and one thing that stayed with me, which I was also telling them yesterday, was one is the development of the creation of a literary corpus, really, and the second thing is the creation of supplementary reading material, and why we shouldn't really confuse the two. You know, we should look at creating literature on one hand, and to support what is happening in schools and so on, that's reading material, not to be confused with literature. So my question to Rimli is, do you think that is something relevant here? The existence of two separate things, two parallel things, are the lines blurred? And what is your opinion?
Okay, again, based on very different contexts that I've encountered, and also looking at this whole question of languages, many languages in the same classroom, and the actual sort of constraints of syllabi, exams, etc. I wouldn't say that the two are like completely different areas, that the supplementary material is something and creative literature is something else. I mean, I'll go back to the earlier point I made, which was to say, in fact, one cannot pitch the lowest common denominator at the mass, which is how things are usually seen. That so how do you deal with material that is, and this perhaps goes back to the idea of what is a good read, is something that stimulates your imagination, something that has a bridge between the familiar and the unfamiliar, something that where language, even if you don't understand all of it, is something that you remember. I mean, from my own childhood, I'm thinking of books which perhaps today would be considered sexist, some of them, folk tales and so on. But why is it that a particular interesting use, a phrase, has stayed in my mind? What has that phrase in turn generated? So potentially it's the generative quality of the text and image and the relationship between the two, and of course the layout and the font, that would be of terrific significance in this. And in one failed, let me say, attempt, I and some of my friends in Bengal, we created something that we called play texts, which were meant precisely to bridge this gap between what is creative and what is functional, because we didn't believe in that. But at the same time, we tested it out on the field in many different places, and they worked beautifully. And a lot of the stuff was actually taken from textbooks, but different things were done to them. So at the end of the day, it wasn't something that just remained like a piece of, a piece of stone or something. It was something that they could play with. And the teachers, our biggest enemy, turned out to be the teachers. Many of them said, in private and some in public, they said, this is terrible. The children are just sitting there and they don't want to talk to us. They're doing things on their own. So where we had asked them to give 5 words that you can think of, they'd given 50, of which, let's say 30 were completely made up words. But they were doing it on their own. So that was one major obstacle that we faced, that texts which capture the imagination, which fulfill a lot of these criteria, also in some ways sabotage the constraints of the context within which they are supposed to work. So they actually make children think, they make them play, they make them create new texts, new endings. So it's potentially, I think, a huge amount of our energy should go into really exploring this continuum in different languages. And I'll just, if I may, give one example. Once, long ago, I was invited to Assam for a textbook teacher material on producing, and there were many people representing Bodo, the language which is now, of course, also taught at university level. And I asked somebody to translate the stuff, and it was terrible. I mean, no person would want to read that. And I said, it cannot be that the Bodo language, which is so old, has only this terrible stuff. To cut the story short, and unfortunately I don't know the name of the person, so otherwise I would have revealed it. It turned out there was one very elderly senior person, as everybody said in whispers, he's senior, don't tell him, who had decided that he was a master writer, and he had written all those verses himself. And each one was worse than the other. And when I asked the young Bodo people who were there, they just recited off the top of their head wonderful poems. So it's really also fishing for material that's already there and then making it work.
Again, in trying to build this literary corpus, which I think it's so important that we create and we build literature for our children to read. One of the things, yes, of course, is generating new content, contemporizing old one, bringing back whatever is required. But what role can translations play in contributing towards this corpus of literature?
Translations are quite important, and there are good number of translations are happening, and there are more space for more translation. Having said that, and I worked, I think at last 25 years I was working in translating children's literature. But the one issue I faced while going to children with these translations are, children need material with their local specifications, local situation. Many times I found children are attracted to not very good quality books in quotation than some of the best books translated from other languages. So though the translations have a major role to play, if I can little more elaborate, say, for example, say one of my favorite book is published by Tulika, What Shall I Make, which is a very simple book. I have published that in Malayalam when I worked in Kerala State Institute of Children's Literature. Sold very well, appreciated very well, and it is one of my favorite book. And I was very, I was very happy to see one of my one author in Kerala recently mentioned that as one of the book influenced him in that 10 book challenge. I mean, it's that author started from Dostoevsky, and this was the last book. So I mean, that book was liked by everyone. But if I place that book and another book by a Malayali author, not produced with that quality, but with local flavor. Children goes for that local flavor. I don't like that Malayalam book that much, but it sells more. It is read by children, like that more. So though there is, you can't live in an island. So there is no need. There is need of translations, but you can't forget the role of creating appropriate local language material.
Right. Can I add to this? Sure.
Well, one thing we all, I think most of us know that children's publishing cannot take place unless there are partnerships, unless a book is done in more than one region, more than other different language areas. The finest books of Europe are published, even before the book is published, they have tie-ups with another 25 or 30 publishers in different languages. That's why they can afford such beautiful illustrations. They can spend so much time developing a book and all that. But of course, one has to be very careful selecting books or translations. Not that every book will work everywhere. And then again, when we talk of translations, generally we think of translation from Europe and America, from the first world to India. We need to do much more translation within the country. And I'm sure there will be books in different parts of the country which work very well in other languages. But very little effort has been made in that because A, the Indian publishers don't go out to make any effort in that direction, and B, there has been a dearth. But another thing which can be tried, and we tried that to some extent in National Book Trust, was to take a book which maybe did not have satisfactory illustrations, but use the text and change the illustrations. But translations are very important to fill in any gap. I mean, just talking something personal. 2 years back, there was a need in Cambodia of science books at elementary level, entry level. And we provided scholastic books in Khmer for all the schools in Cambodia. And that was the quickest way of filling the need. And again, another thing which I mentioned last night, and I'll say that again because that is true. When you come to Nainital district, go to the villages where we work in, go to Almora district, ask any child the most favorite books of theirs for children, and they will say Kajri Gai. Now, Kajri Gai is not developed in Uttarakhand. Kajri Gai books are Mama Moo of Sweden. It's a Swedish cow, Swedish barn, Swedish farmer, Swedish crow. But still children relate to that because most of the village families have cows. Cow is a very important part for a Kumani woman. Her family, her house is not complete without a cow. And they compare that my cow doesn't swing, my cow doesn't do all that. And just one point. In this whole scenario, one would want our national organizations or the organizations which have been taken, like we grew up in the time which was, we were getting Soviet books. And after that, some Chinese books came. Then came a time of NBT books and CBT books. And I think now these two organizations are failing children in filling the gap. If I look at the CBT books, and of course they're parts of our page, the finest books are the ones which were developed by Shankar. A lot of time has passed since then. How come? I mean, recently in our meeting, a member from Delhi University, a selection committee member, she says, now we have come to a point that we have to reject CBT books. Because we keep very high standard. And not talking a standard of quality of paper, I mean, any printer can, even these people producing substandard books are also using art paper, heavy grammage. They also bring in color. They don't know how to use color. They don't have the right kind of illustrations. After Mala Dayal, who was an excellent editor of Nehru Bal Pustakale series, there has been such a decline in the quality of books from NBT. I've shared this with the new director. I made a request. I said, look, people of the country, they trust National Book Trust, Nehru Bal Pustakale. It's your responsibility to pay special attention to it. No, same thing continues.
Can I add? Sorry. No, I am in agreement with Arvind Kumarji in all those things. What I found in many Indian languages are children needs more information and more text. In an Indian English publishing or maybe international publishing, it could be considered Vedi books, which is too much text. So, see, these are two different situations. So, if you force this standard good book decision on concept on everyone, it is imposing the concepts of dominating section of the society to everyone. So that may not work actually.
Yes, this is just to share something that I myself have discovered. As a Bengali who's grown up outside of Bengal for most of my life, occasionally books were read out to me, but by and large, I sort of had to. I've never actually formally studied Bangla, but anyway, I figured out, and at some point I started reading them. But it's only recently that I have gone back to the archives to look at back issues of this journal called Sandesh, which means, of course, that Mishti that you have, but it also means Sandesh, as in news, which was started by Upendra Kishore Rai Chaudhary, the father of Shukumar, who was the father of Satyajit Ray, just to give you a sense. Anyway, now what I found, and I'm not going to talk about fiction and poetry, which is there galore, but I'm talking about exactly what you said about information and literature and a children's magazine. I found some amazing material on World War I that was there in this journal. And the son had actually gone to Manchester University to work on printing and technology. And he'd just come back before the war. And this is the father writing for the most part. Occasionally the son comes in and they have very distinctive voices. But what I wanted to share with you was they're talking about really ghastly things. Trenches, guns, battleships, submarines. So it's a lot of it is the discourse of science. But it is science which is not necessarily being celebrated. It's science which is itself seen as something that's being tried out. So it's sort of putting that whole discourse of progress and science also in a asking the child to interrogate that. You know, why are people dying in submarines? Why are they not working sometimes? And my last example is about translation. This was an article also in the same journal a couple of years later after the submarine article, which was about a man walking in, and this is how it begins, literally, with his face blown off. And these two doctors, French doctors, reconstructing him from bits of his own body. So I guess the first kind of plastic surgery. And then it ends on a very grim black humor. This guy says to the doctor, well, you've done everything, but what about my mustache? You know, that was me. Where is that? And so he says, no problem, and just shaves off another part of his body and gives him a mustache. And so this guy goes out with a cheroot, you know, smoking it. So I did a double take. I said, this is for children, and so on and so forth. And then I just, by chance, talking about the internet, the French doctors' names were mentioned. So I Googled it, and believe it or not, it turned out to be an article, at least 70% of it, which had indeed been published and which is now archived in some Australian archive. Excepting when Upendra Kishore had translated it sometime in I think this was 15 or 16, he had he kept it. The French doctors were there. This was World War I. This was not happening in Bengal. But he had done something with the language. There were no illustrations, where you could read it and read it as both information and interrogation, and this, as I said, extremely unchildlike, macabre, grim humor. And then he'd kind of added a coda of his own at the very end, which at some point when I translate it, you can read that. So it's, what I'm also saying is that I think that sophistication of adaptation, translation, and reconfiguration is also something that we completely, totally erase, you know. And that, I mean, potentially India is, again, a minefield just waiting to go off with that. I mean, it could be any story, any text in any language, and redoing it for a contemporary young readership requires a level of invention and confidence, I think, that perhaps we are not really encouraging. I don't know what.
Attempted to. But Shantanu, if you have to look at Assamese, publishing, and look at translations, how useful will it be for you to have books translated into Assamese, or to have your own books translated from Assamese into various languages, as a publisher and as somebody who's generating literature for children?
Yes. To me, translation is a two-way process. When we were a child, at the time we got stories translated to Assamese only. There's only one-way communication. So nowadays, what I did with the help of National Book Trust, I developed around 30 manuscripts, and most of, at least 50% of those were published by NBT. There's a plus point if a manuscript is published by NBT, because it is translated to other languages, which I can't do. So therefore, I developed those manuscripts and requested in an organized workshop. Then we developed, then it was published by NBT. So the result is two-way communication. Those books were written by Assamese writers on characters from Assam. Environment is Assam. Natural surroundings is from Assam. Culture is from Assam. Animals, life and wildlife, everything from Assam. So the children from other parts of the country, through the translation work of those books, come to know about Assam, to know about the children life of Assam. So I think this sort of thing, interaction, exchange, will do much more for national integration. Children from one part, they come to know the children, their lifestyle, about their culture through books. So in our country, translation for children books is very much essential, I think.
I think the quality of the books that we get from, by virtue of translating, may also just sort of, may surprise us, I feel, because of the kind of variety we will get.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. But, speaking of books and publishing and all of that, sometimes I really feel we forget the most important cog in the wheel, which is the poor author, who's working, and the reality of the situation is they're juggling several jobs because writing is not going to pay, and you can't sustain livelihood on that. What can we do to, I'd like to ask all of you this question: what can we do, and what must we do to nurture our writers? Gayatri, do you want to?
One of the actually all the wonderful books, children's books that I know of, whether it's Western or I think Indian, I think there is a lot of freedom given to the author. In fact, freedom and the brand is the author actually, not rather than the publisher. So, for example, I mean, I lived many years in the US, and during which time I had my daughter also, and many of the greatest books that I read to her, I bought it because of the author. It didn't matter who the publisher was. So I think we have to nurture authors that way. We have to actually create the author brand for the good authors, and that's something I totally believe in. And I think maybe we are still a very long way off with this, but then I just in the US, I would like to make that comparison because I feel children's literature is amazing. It has progressed a lot in the US. And one of the examples I want to give about is Eric Carle, how he has been sort of, his brand has been nurtured. It's not just the merchandise that I'm talking about, but there is where I used to live in Boston, just about 100 miles away, there is a Eric Carle museum where his original illustrations are actually displayed in amazing ways, and children can go look at those illustrations. There are workshops for children on how he wrote, how he illustrated, that children can explore that. And so, I mean, that kind of a brand has to be created, I think, for the great authors here. I firmly believe in it. So that's how you can promote great books also, through the author brand. So.
Rimli, would you?
I'll pass it on and let me think.
Yeah, I agree with Gayatri that see, there is a need for most well-known authors, and we need to support authors and make writing a viable vocation. I think there are two agencies which can work. One is governmental agencies by raising the standards of payment to authors and making systems to make sure that authors and translators are paid. Other thing is writers getting together, like writers cooperative, and I think there are many experiments like that. One is the well-known Kerala experience of SPCA, Sahitya Pravartaka Cooperative Society, which offered 30% royalty to the authors. And in a conference about translation in Sweden, I met some publishers from Arab countries, 5 publishers from various children's publishers and children's authors from Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, etc. They come together, formed an association and publishing. So similar options are to be pursued, I think.
But you know, the whole thing, what is important is that books should travel, books should sell. And once a book starts selling and revenue comes, naturally author gets a fair share. When there's a demand in the market, the publisher will never be unfair to the author. Our experience in Scholastic was that some of the authors, in terms of royalties, received much more than they had ever imagined. And in a book which was published, say, 15 years back, the royalties still keep coming year on year.
This is in India?
Indian authors I'm talking of. But the book has to sell. I mean, in the society, there has to be the situation that people are buying books. Now, he talked of Kerala Authors Cooperative, again, a region in which books are bought by people. But in Hindi, the kind of situation we talked of, what will your cooperative do? I mean, yes, unless the cooperative gets a lot of money from the government year on year to publish books and give the entire royalty on the full edition to the author, irrespective that the entire stock lies in the warehouse, there's nothing else will happen. If the corrupt officer will continue, the corrupt educator will continue looking for books on the basis of bribes. If a publisher is giving 50% or even 10% or 20% bribe, where will the money come for the author's royalties? Where will the money come for paying to the illustrator? The whole problem is that there is this big hole in the bucket. And that hole has been growing since I left private publishing to join National Book Trust. Before joining National Book Trust in '87, as president of Hindi Association, I warned people. I won the election on the plank of stop doing this, and this will only get worse if you continue giving away the money which you need for your own businesses. It used to be 10% bribe. Now it's 50%. Where will it end? And what will come to the author? Unless you only talk in terms of, some government giving or society giving. One has to create a situation, in whichever way, that books should move faster, larger volumes should sell, and money should come, or the books are translated. I mean, some Indian publishers are now developing books which they also find foreign partners. Foreign partner means the European price or the American price is much higher. So the royalty comes in here on the euros price, and the money is big. The kind of problems we are talking of, I don't think Tara Publishing, they're facing the problem, because for every book they're partners. Even Tulika gets many partners because they have the quality. The first thing is to develop quality. Our senior writers, especially in Hindi, are not writing for children, the new ones. In the past they did. We had workshops when I was director with authors, basically to enhance understanding of how to approach children's writing. And I remember a couple of senior writers, they admitted, they said they did not know how to how to write for children. They were writing more about children rather for them. If better authors were known, I mean, the one author he was talking about from Malayalam, he didn't name, that he doesn't write the book, like the book, but the book sells very well. She is a well-known, awarded, much respected author. All the parents are buying her books, so they're also buying her books for children. So it goes like this. So all for like authors.
Classic catch-22 situation.
But then join Page and fight corruption.
Hey, Gayatri, you wanted to say something?
I wanted to make a point about books for 0 to 6-year-olds, because just re-emphasize the point that I made earlier, that is the target age group that we need to focus heavily on in terms of quality books, because that's where the reading starts. I mean, you have to address that. And I find that for 0 to 2 years, there is absolutely nothing in the Indian market. In fact, reading aloud to children has to start from when the child is able to sit on a child's mother's lap, maybe 3 months old. That's where you need to start reading aloud to a child. Book becomes a toy at that age. Just the act of turning the page is very exciting for a child. And there's absolutely nothing in the Indian market. I mean, this is something that I find it very hard to believe and very hard to digest. So, yeah. I brought up that point because you talked about raising the readership, and it has to start at that age. So, yeah.
Very interesting. Just one line. Recently, I was making a selection to suggest some books to an agency. They want to do them in 3 languages, including 2 tribal link languages. Early readers. And I found a set of 5 books done by a publisher in Delhi about 30 years back, or 35 years back. Nothing great, but they're workable, they're nice, they're simple, kind of the age group she's talking of. But why hasn't anything come in this period of 30 years?
I think there is no one solution, clearly. But probably one of the areas that has really not been thought through in an innovative way is, in fact, the digital world. And by this, I don't simply mean using a Disney template and replacing Mickey Mouse with Hanuman. That's not what I mean at all. And this is where I feel younger people, not necessarily people who've been out on the field visiting schools, or even people who consciously feel they can do something for children, but simply younger people who say don't shy away from our very complex contemporary realities, which hits even a child in a very remote place. I feel that is an area that has been completely left unexplored. It has been tried by few sort of specialized studios and so on, but with a view to exploit kinds of what they perceive as market-driven ventures. But in terms of, and just to give one example, amazing, again, getting the young child, every child in India would at least know one language, if not more. And there would be a kind of natural multilingual setting. Now for that, new media could be very, very, wonderfully used. So I'm not shying away or moving away from the printed page or the image. But I'm just simply saying that much more could happen in that space. Yeah. And this is where people who are not professional educationists and so on could come in, and there could be many more collaborative ventures. I feel that this is a very promising.
Taking from there, Rimli, just to sort of also wrap up, what would we want to see more of or less of as far as children's books go, in the coming future?
Future of children's books.
Yeah. What do we want to see more of?
In future, I like to say children books, and children books.
Just more, is it?
You see, I am working with children from Tea Garden labor working class. The children in Assam, 40 lakhs people are there. At least 10 lakhs will be the children. They have their own language, dialect, for communication purpose. They have to go to Assamese medium school. So they speak to their parents in their own language, and when they go to school, they'll have to learn another language. To bridge the gap, we introduced storytelling program. Children literature we are using. We are adopting stories, tales, fables, and we are telling them. We have 100 storytellers, trained storytellers. We have a lot of experience. After listening, after a few sessions, children wanted to read the stories themselves. They are not only satisfied by listening stories, they want books. We provide books, but they don't read because they don't know the alphabets. It is very amazing to see they learn the language very quickly. We have little effort, and with this effort they learn the Assamese language. Other aspects also, how children books help children. We have found children reading children books make them self-confidence. When they learn to read a book, they can read, they can think, they can roam around in their imagination. The self-confidence is built up by reading books in the early days. So in future also, I think there must be children books. Whether other electronic media will be there or not, will be there definitely, but books will be there. We'll have to write books according to make them suitable for their age, for their culture, for the region.
Right.
I think that's the future of these children books.
Rubin, what would you like to see more of?
One word, books for all children.
Arvind, what about you?
I recall what a professor at IIT Mumbai said in one of our discussions long back. He was talking of his young child, and in a shoebox, empty shoebox, he filled it up with small books for the child. And he saw how the child who could not read played with the books, and how the child linked with the books and together. And that's very important. E-books and all is something for later. All children around the world need the physical books. In the beginning, a book they can play with, a book they can destroy, the book they can tear, a book they're not scared of. I mean, a book doesn't come with, don't do this, don't do that, be careful with the page and all this. And that's what we want.
Rimli, what would your answer to this? What would you like to see more of?
Yeah, of course. Like everybody else, I would like to see children having access to books and also having the space to deal with the books in the way they each one of them wants to. So really the space for individuated responses. I think one of the biggest challenges today, whether it's for a child or for an adult, is that not only is there a template of what is a good book, what is a good illustration, or what is a good animation, but also what is the response. So it's that whole emotional, intellectual field which we are completely, which is being eroded completely. That's the biggest challenge. So if I really had to end with a definition of what is a good book, I would say it would be that book which triggers off the individuated response, that which triggers off a new generative faculty in the child. And how we are going to do it, I think, is not something that I can even say in a sentence. But that's what it is.
I would like to see more books for 0 to 6-year-olds, picture books, which will actually help them raise their imagination levels and, of course, bridge, like you said, your definition of good book was really good. It should bridge the gap between the familiar and the unfamiliar. But then I would like to add a few more things to that. It should help create that bond between the adult and the child. And it should also, the book should be so lovable and interesting that children get addicted to books rather than TV. That's
Yeah. Any questions? Sure.
Yeah, Arvindji, you were talking to a guide to good book. Now, my other area of concern is that the book reviews of children's books. They are not the reviews, they are just the introductions. And as you were saying that there are some fast-moving books. So, you know, whether the book is good or not good, or, you know, fast-moving book, or, you know, some bribe is given to that book, it doesn't matter. It just comes the introduction to in the children's supplement or any magazines, and teachers and parents, they do not have any clues about whether this book is good or that book is good, and they just end up in buying some book which will be helpful for the projects in the school. And the good book is totally neglected, and one reason is that we don't have good reviews of good books, at least in regional languages. So I think we could come together and do something for that, at least good books are very reviewed very nicely.
actually there is initiative called goodbooks.in.
Yeah, but that is in English. I am talking about regional languages. Yeah, because in English there are many such platforms. Yeah, I've seen that.
I'm not so sure because they do tend to work with all publishers in the country. So,
but you know, you're right in saying that some kind of assistance is required, not only by parents but also librarians, in making the right selection. I saw way back, I'm talking of about 15-20 years back, in Australia, the local book trust was coming out with reading lists, recommended reading lists for different age groups. The Book Trust in England does it, and they do it very well. It's always one author who makes the entire selection, and the book comes under the author's name, so we know who's responsible, you know. And that's done very, very objectively. In India, we have made a small beginning with the books, the list which we give to CBSE. CBSE recommends them, and the CBSE affiliated schools buy them quite blindly. So that only guarantees that no poor book will reach. Our committee is very, very strict. I had my 4 publications under consideration this year. All 4 were rejected by our committee in my presence. So that's good. You know, they go by very objectively. They don't look at the source or anything else. This has been suggested to Page that we should also make this list public. Maybe have a website with more information on these books. But we are a very small group. Time is a constraint. Maybe sitting in village Chatola, I'll start doing that, putting together the website. But I think such recommended lists are needed. There could be one from Page, there could be from other source, and let people decide which source they like to trust. And that at least becomes some kind of assistance in making the right choice.
For including children's literature, very much. But and I would seriously say that why not? I mean, this could be a moment when we could at least informally start putting together a website where different people in different languages could contribute. Have even a bilingual thing. It could be very modest to begin with, maybe, and therefore when people say, okay, well, these are 2 interesting books this year, this is not to say that the others are not interesting, but it could even be subjective and say, well, these are 2 books I happen to pick up. So, I mean, if you know of a way we could actually get this going, I'll be happy to join.
And we are struggling with what do we publish, how do we make books accessible, what are children reading, how can librarians be better informed, and on the other hand we have the book mafia and all the money changing hands. I don't know how we're going to find solution to this, but I think it'd be nice if you see more translations, if you try to find a way to unify all the various things we're doing in this country and create this, you know, this great tradition of literature for children. I think that would be nice to see. Yeah. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Arvinda.